Only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on IP2Startup. Today is June 8th, and we'd like to welcome everyone who's joining us today on the call. So basically, we're going to talk about the IP2Startup program by NCET2 in identifying market-aligned university IP for licensing and startup creation. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to talk a little bit more about how to ask questions and where to find the slides and the video of the webinar today. So to ask questions, there is a questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel on the right. So if you have questions for the speakers, we will have Q&A at the end. Just type them in and your question will be queued. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, but if we can't get to your question, there will be a support email address that will be put on the chat box, and you can send your questions through there. The slides and video recording will be available 24 to 48 hours after the webinar concludes. We also recommend that you subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our other videos on there, so you can see other webinars as well as recordings of our previous congressional briefing. I'd like to highlight, though, before we start, that the IP2Startup program is part of our third University Startups Demo Day. It will be held on October 16 and 17 in Washington, D.C. The IP2Startups program is only one of three programs that will be highlighted at the event. The first one is the flagship event of the day, the University Startups Demo Day, where we will present and showcase a select number of companies to present in front of corporates and investors. And the other one is an investor roadshow for Series A and B companies, as well as exit companies, to showcase in front of VCs, angels, and in particular the VCs coming from the American Chinese University Fund. But for today, we'll talk a little bit more about the IP2Startup program and how universities can bring in their IP to be presented in front of our corporate selection committee. Just another reminder that if you do wish to submit for both for startups and companies as well as IP, the early deadline is on July 14th, and we do encourage everyone to submit early. We just want to point out that most of the time we've had 2 demo days, and the last couple of demo days, it showed that those that submit early actually do get selected and get scored more favorably. We're not really sure why, but we looked at the statistics, and it looks like that the corporates feel they have more time to look at the companies and give more attention to them. And of course, if you are part of a good company with a good management team, I think it is part of your your company culture to not to rush things and do stuff last minute. So hopefully, keep it in mind that our deadline is in about a month, but we do encourage everyone to submit as early as possible, and that will also give us enough time to to talk to you about corrections and stuff like that if there's anything wrong with your submission. Upcoming webinars. So we hope that you're registered for the next two. The second one in this series is about the University Startups Demo Day. So if you haven't registered for that, make sure you join us next week, because we'll talk specifically about the selection process for startups for the demo day in October. And on June 21st, for universities that are on the call, this is actually very interesting to most of the universities that we've spoken to, how to create a university angel group to fund your startups. And this is co-organized with Kent State University. So hopefully you guys can join us in the next couple of webinars in the next couple of weeks. All right, so enough of me. I'd like to introduce today's panel. Today's panel consists of, uh, three people that have been in the business of creating IP, so creating startups from IP and looking at startups and IP from both in universities and also in the corporate side. So our first speaker for today is NCET2's Executive Director, Tony Stanko. He will start us off with an introduction, followed by Dr. Glenn Vonk. He is our Director for Business Development. He used to be the Director of Advanced Technology at BD Tech. And last but definitely not the least, Dr. Vicky Scarborough. She's a startup development officer for NCET2, and she is a former external technology director for Sherwin-Williams. So without further ado, I will turn it over now to Tony.
All right, thank you so much, Ria. So Tony Stanko, Executive Director of the National Council on Entrepreneurial Tech Transfer, NCET2 for short. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some background on our programs. So it's about 2 years now. NCET2 worked with over 25 Fortune 500 companies to create a university corporate commercialization program that basically takes university IP and startups from creation to corporate exit. So, and this came about when Congress contacted us and wanted to hear about some new models and asked if we had any ideas. Basically, most people know, I think, that Congress funds about $137 billion worth of research every year, $37 billion roughly at universities, $100 billion at federal labs, and they were looking, to have more commercialization of that research in the way of startups, especially, to create jobs for the country. When they contacted us, we said, sure, let's talk, and we said, why don't we do a summit? So we put together a group of about 25 Fortune 500 companies, and Glenn, he was at BD, as Ria mentioned, and Vicky used to be at Sherwin-Williams at the time, both in director roles. So they led that effort, that summit, and after that summit, basically a subcommittee got created with the 25 corporates that led into a model that will be described shortly by Glenn. Once we had the model put together, it took us about 3 months actually to put the slides together to kind of iron out the model. Once we did that, we took it on a roadshow to Palo Alto, New York, and Philadelphia before we started briefing Congress. Basically, it was 50 people in the room, roughly a third angels, a third VCs, and a third universities, to kind of represent all the stakeholders that are part of the model. After that, I think the last Philadelphia roadshow was in November, and in December we started briefing Congress of 2015. We had about 8 briefings that culminated in September 2016 in a demo day pilot that maybe some of you attended. So the demo day, and Glenn will get into that in a second, was the first thing we piloted from the model, and now the thing we're talking about today, the program of today's webinar, the IP2Startup, is the second part of that model. So Glenn, with that, maybe you can take it from here.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Yep. So that's me. And if you just go on to the next one. So here's a picture of the model, and I think a lot of you have seen this before. Basically, the idea, as Tony mentioned, is the federal funded research, both at the national labs and universities, gets placed into startups which live oftentimes within universities, and we know that startups that are associated with universities are probably 6 times more likely to succeed because of the support the universities provide for them and the start that they get. They then eventually will connect to some kind of commercial organization. We see that in the Corporate Commercialization Center there, our council, and this is a place for us to connect them to the corporates. Usually there's some kind of a funding issue with early stage startups. Often that funding issue is resolved first with public money and then with private money. So that kind of talks you through the diagram. I want to just take a moment to step through the different things that we're doing so you can see how we are working to facilitate the whole ecosystem, and then we're going to really focus on the first step, which is addressing the issue of getting more aligned startups to what the corporate needs are. And that would be what we call our Phase 0 University IP to University Startup Program. So oftentimes from a corporate perspective, we can look at a lot of startups and not find things that are very much aligned to us. So this is really aimed at creating more of the startups that are aligned, or facilitating the kinds of interactions that are going to point you to the licenses and the technology acquisitions that really make sense, especially if you're looking as a corporate at something that's very core to your business. So there'll be more about that later, and I'm not going to drive into that right now. Let's go to the next one. So the next one is, once the startups are created, how do we find them? And this was really the big learning for NCET 2. A lot of the venues for connecting startups to corporates, I think, were very inefficient, in the sense that there were often intermediaries, or they involved long meetings and lots of time for every startup that you looked at. So what the demo day does is kind of brings a Google model to this and says, let's take just the information you need, make it really available to you. Let's do some kind of a ranking system so that you really see the best stuff right away at the top of your list, and make it very efficient for you to find the startups that are really important for you. So again, the phase 0 is, let's try to get more of the startups that are aligned. Phase 1, let's make it really easy to find them. And then the next phase, on the next slide, is let's work with you to get that kind of funding that's going to move them along. And NCET 2 is certainly able to work with corporates and startups to identify the kinds of milestones that are going to really drive towards a commercialization event, which is the final phase. And go to the next one. Where there's a private funding event, and then leading to either a stand-up as an IPO, or an exit as an acquisition of some kind. So all these things are supported by NCET 2, either through the IP2Startup demo day, or some of the road shows and investor events, as Ria has mentioned, with the Chinese investors. So at this point, we'll go on to the next one. And I'll just turn it over to Vicki here, and Vicki will take you through the main subject of our webinar today, which is the IP2Startup program.
All right. Good afternoon, or good morning, or hello to everyone online. I'm going to take you through the IP2Startup program. Really, the next slide here talks about that this was really an industry-created program, and it allows you, the university, to put forward your best technologies for selection by NCET 2's members. For basically looking at your technologies for market readiness and potential for licensing and potential startup creation. And the highest scoring intellectual property will be featured in our next meeting in a book, which we're calling the IP book for right now, for lack of a better term. And I'm going to take you through the whole program and discuss how you get involved. So in the next slide, it really talks about what the program is. And I know that you have an abundance of intellectual property that has value, and there are many pieces of intellectual property that are licensed by startups to start their own companies. And by the same token, many large companies will also license technology to further their own businesses. But some IP has value, but no one yet has utilized it for further development. And you may not know why, or you may not have been able to get any traction anywhere else. And so what we've done is we've created this program where you can submit your intellectual property for evaluation by the corporates that we have in our membership, for feedback and possible licensing opportunities or discussions thereof. And so that's really what the program is all about. So what is eligible to become technology for licensing? First of all, you've got to have intellectual property that is not currently under license or legal obligation to anyone. So if it's under any type of obligation, it can't be submitted. But you can submit pieces of intellectual property, 5 to 10 pieces of intellectual property for review by corporate partners. And the IP has got to be either a granted patent or being in process as a provisional. so that we have something under review. It's a piece of property that's under review. Corporates have a really hard time dealing with trade secrets or anything that is not related to actual property that they can take ownership of. The online form that we have will guide you through the steps of the questions regarding the types of technology and when it was submitted to the patent office, the countries that are covered, and so forth. So these are the kinds of questions that you'll be asked. And it's a fairly simple thing. So what you're going to be providing on the next slide is really a summary of your invention. And then these are the kinds of things that you're going to be ranked on the adjacent boxes. So if it's a summary of the invention, really is it incremental to an existing market? Is it going to transform an existing area, or is it new to the world? It's something no one's ever seen before. And those numbers associated with each of those areas rank it as getting a high score or low score. And obviously, if it's incremental to an existing market and there's a lot of existing IP around it, it may get a very low score. But if it's new to the world, it may get a very high score. And then how is the current need being met in the market? So if the needs are being met very well, then you're going to get a lower score. But if it's not being addressed at all, you're going to get a higher score. So what we're trying to do is match up what the invention provides to the business need in the market. So the size of market, could it be a small market, a dying market, a medium market, a new market, or a very large market that's already in existence? And then prior art. Prior art can be, there's a lot of prior art, and that's very difficult sometimes for large companies, because they know that there could be a lot of competition in that area. Or if there's no prior art, that's even better. So the less prior art, the better, generally speaking, but not always. This, again, is up to the person who is actually grading the technology as to whether or not these things are good or bad. So then on the next slide, we'll really show you the link here on how to proceed to submit your IP and what it looks like on the form online. So the patent title and names of the inventors, you can see what we've done is limit you to so many words. And this is to help us get through a lot of IP very quickly. We know that there's going to be a lot of submissions, and we want to be able to get through it all. So limiting you on words is important for us, and for you to try to succinctly describe what you have. This summary description, the need being met by the technology, the technical area, the current market, and the current state of the market. So those are the things you have to fill out. And then there's other things where you are in your development, whether it's a concept, a proof of you've got a proof of concept work that's already been done, or working prototypes. So then once that's submitted, what's going to happen is in the next page, which comes under corporate review. And the corporate members are going to review the information that you have provided. And they're going to give you some feedback. And we're going to have to limit it, the amount of feedback that you get, because there is, again, going to be a lot of submissions, and they have precious time to provide a lot of feedback. So we're really going to give them, very little, they're really going to give you very little feedback, but some feedback. And that is that you might have too much prior art, or the market isn't high enough, it's diminishing market, or there's just not an area here for market development. And they're going to have business reasons for those answers. The scores will be provided back to you, and the best scoring IP is, again, going to be accumulated in book form for presentation to corporate members at the next meeting. And then if you're selected, you'll have the opportunity to discuss this intellectual property with the corporates who have an interest. And that can be at our meeting or after the meeting. We can set up phone calls for you. So this is really how we intend to go forward with what the corporates are going to be doing. And on the next slide, it kind of shows you the actual sheet of what we're doing. The highest score is 50. And so basically this is an Excel spreadsheet that we're able to very quickly tally up what the scores are going to be. Again, looking at differentiation and competitive advantage, competitiveness in the marketplace itself, the size of the market, prior art, and patent scope. So basically, all of these things are important for a business to understand how valuable a piece of intellectual property is. And it's important for you to know that these guys are considering all these areas when they're looking at intellectual property. Okay, and finally, the benefits that you reap from this participation in this program. Well, first of all, you get global exposure for the intellectual property that your university has, and the multinational companies that are participating in our program. And we have a lot of companies that I'll highlight on the last slide, but basically this gives you an opportunity to get exposure to all those guys, because you may or may not be talking with them. It gives you the opportunity to meet with the corporates who have a strong interest in the technology, so that then you have some traction. Someone is very interested in it. And so you get a chance to really find out how interested they are and what might happen from that. And then it gives you the opportunity to take intellectual property that you're probably not utilizing today and find out from the real world in terms of corporates what they think of it. What you may think it's valuable, but what do they think? And so it very much is a great way to get some sounding on what in the world this technology can do for somebody else, rather than you thinking that it has value. Then you'll know it has value one way or the other. So it gives you the opportunity to take 5 or 10 pieces of intellectual property and bounce it off a corporate panel. And this would also then give you the opportunity to either have a license or even a potential startup. So if there's not anyone who's interested in licensing the technology, there's also the potential for creating a new startup out of this. If someone has we have enough traction in various areas that we're able to help create new startups from this particular platform of intellectual property. And this could happen because we're putting all the pieces and parts in place, which we're going to talk about in our next webinars about how to do that. And I think the next slide covers our corporate partners. Yes. So as you can see here, we have a wide variety of corporate partners that cover a lot of verticals. They cover the vertical of just basic chemicals. They cover pharma and medical. They cover the automotive industry and the tech industry, whether it's clean tech and computer sciences or also battery-powered technologies and so forth. So there's a lot of coverage here. We have the food industry representative with Smuckers. So there's quite a few folks in this group who are going to be judging all of this intellectual property for its value. And some of them may choose to judge only things that they're very familiar with, but some may also choose to judge things that are not necessarily in their vertical, but they are interested in looking at the intellectual property anyway. So you'll see that there's a lot of different folks here with a lot of different needs and interests, but all of them are very committed to this program and are very interested in seeing what you have. So this really creates pull for you in terms of what you're willing to present to us in the way of not only intellectual property, but your startups as well. So I think from there, we're going to talk about why you need to submit. Basically, I think this was Glenn, right, Glenn?
I'm here, Vicki. So in terms of submitting, there's always a licensing option, and we don't restrict access to the technology. If that's what makes sense for corporate to go directly to a university and develop a license, that's fine. We also are seeing more and more activity on the startup side and more interest in corporates to work with startups, since that's a very efficient route for them. Two main reasons: startups have focus and can move quickly. They don't have all the internal communication requirements, and they can leverage some of the external funds as well. So that often is done through startup development officers who will work with us, work with universities to create those startups and license the IP. It's a good deal for universities because you're getting something that you know there's some market alignment to already. It provides potential employment for students after graduation. And I will say that we did have a student startup who presented at the demo day, and they did an excellent job, and I just love the energy that they brought to this. So the students are really coming on and often develop in place along with the startups as the startups mature. It could also be faculty, chief scientific officers, and advisors, but often paired with an experienced management team of advisors and somebody who's had experience in the commercialization side. This brings a new level of credibility to the startup, especially for the corporates and the investors. We would be very interested to work with the investors and the corporates to set up milestones that make sense for the startups in collaboration with them, so that everybody's very clear on what the target is and working efficiently towards that. We believe that we can get to those targets more quickly and with less investment when we all are agreed on what the subject is. And especially in the medical device area where I worked, it was very disappointing to see a great technology that missed validation because a control hadn't been done. So having this input and interaction very early on, I think, could actually be defining in terms of whether a startup succeeds or not. So I think I've covered the milestones pretty well. Let's go to the next one. And we'll just open it up now for discussions or questions.
So those of you out there who've listened to the presentation and may have a question about the program itself and how you can get involved, or what's on your mind in terms of what you saw, we would love to hear from you. And you know, just shoot us a question in the chat box. That would be great.
All right. So thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Glenn. And thanks, Tony. So while we're waiting for the questions to come in, again, we'd like to remind everyone that, you know, for the next demo day, the deadlines to submit IP as well as to submit companies and startups is on July 14th. And we do encourage everyone to submit as early as possible. That not only gives you time to look at your application to check for errors, but it also gives us time to, to kind of help if we do find something that needs to be improved in your application. So July 14th, just keep that in mind while you're, while we're while you're trying to submit and listen to some of the questions that we have lined up today. All right, so we do have a few here. Let me just start it off with the first one. So Tony, Glenn, and Vicki, do you guys want to read the question on the screen? And Tony, would you like to moderate?
Sure. All right. Thank you. So, Glenn, Vicki, what are some of the hot technologies corporates are looking for?
I can start on the life science side. Synthetic biology is, of course, of great interest, and it's of interest for creating the kind of content, I would say materials of interest that are very difficult either to create or to create efficiently and cleanly. So that's an area that's gaining an interest. Also, on our pharma side, we're seeing a lot of interest in new targets. I would say the pharmas are interested especially interested in this IP2Startup space, because for them there's value in getting into a target area earlier as a competitive advantage. So we're seeing a lot of interest there. Cancer is probably one of the hottest areas where we see activity. I would say chronic conditions are also very important, and they correspond pretty well to the cost of the healthcare system. Often those targets are linked to diagnostics, and that integration provides, I think, an additional source of value for those. On the food side, we have seen interest in green materials and materials that are unique materials, and also in ideas which improve the experience of preparing food. So people have busy lives, and the food companies are looking for a way to improve the quality of the experience that they get, rather than just throwing something in a microwave and pulling it out in a plastic tray, something that can be assembled more or less quickly on your stove, but it ends up being something that's a lot nicer than a TV dinner. So a lot of people are looking at sort of amping up the convenience and also making the experience much nicer. Those two components are either separately or together. So Vicki, you want to talk a little bit too?
Yeah, I think on the chemical side, we are, particularly from my background, corrosion science is very interesting to a lot of people in the chemical side, whether it be somebody like Schlumberger or Dow or Sherwin-Williams or any of the other companies that are involved in protecting against corrosion. Corrosion science and any technologies associated with corrosion resistance is a very hot topic for them. With regard to computer folks, augmented reality, virtual reality, all of these topics are extraordinarily important right now, and there is so much work being developed as we speak on all of those types of technologies. As you see every day, some new augmented reality or virtual reality technology emerging. In battery technology, there is a lot of work going on and trying to extend the life of batteries, keep batteries safer from catching on fire. Those types of technologies are of interest as well. So there's always verticals that you can find interesting hot areas, so to speak, for working in technologies that would be of value to corporates. So those are a few examples. There's more, obviously, but those are some kinds of things that we have seen our corporates articulate as being part of their needs list.
I have a couple of other ones too, just to build on Vicki. The whole energy supply chain, I think, is important. It turns out, of course, generating energy from ecologically friendly sources such as light, wind power, or wave power is important, but oftentimes that generation is sort of contingent on what the environmental conditions have to be. In other words, is there wind or is it sunny? So storage technology, energy storage technology, even at a large scale, I think is becoming a key technology, as well as distribution and conservation of energy. So those are all areas that I think could play really well. And we're hearing more and more about water, water purification, water safety. As the populations grow, especially in some regions, water is getting to be a very important issue.
Okay, excellent. Here's the next question. I just, before we go on to the next question though, I just want to remind the audience, yeah, you can actually hear what the corporates are looking for in most cases, either on some of the webinars we do, which highlight corporates' interests. So I think a few will be coming up in the next few months where individual corporates will be on to explicitly say what they're looking for and how they want to do deals. So you can look forward to that. And also at the conference, we have corporate reverse showcase panels where they get up and talk for 5 minutes each and just, again, say what they're looking for, how they like to do deals. So that's another way to really, get inside their heads to be more responsive to their needs. All right. how are our proprietary IP-related info protected when exchanging them with these companies? Yeah, that's a good question. So who wants to take that? Let me just preface it with, you should not be submitting any proprietary or confidential information to these firms. We're looking for some very general public information so they can make early determinations as to whether you're on the right track. Nobody's looking for specific information or proprietary information. And that's especially true if you haven't filed a patent yet. But Vicki and Len, anybody want to say anything?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you just said. If you're not comfortable sharing that particular piece of intellectual property because it's not protected in any way, then don't do it. But if it's already, that's why we put the rules kind of where we set them, is that it's already got to be a patent that's already been approved, or you've submitted a provisional that's already into the patent office. So by virtue of doing those things, you should be protected when exchanging them with the companies. And then if you want to get into a non-disclosure agreement with that company after you found that there's interest, then that's up to you to do. And then you can get into more depth about what it is you want to talk about. But because this technology may have already received a patent, then it's already public information to begin with. And so that protects you by virtue of the fact that it's already published. So if you proceed and you find that there's traction and you want to go further, then it would be in your best interest for both of you to get a non-disclosure agreement together and be able to go into more depth. But that's really the best way to protect yourself.
So if I could just add a little bit, oftentimes the discomfort comes around sharing the details of the technology, and I would recommend, at the early stage, if you have that locked down really well, the more you can share, the more confidence you're going to see on the corporate side in terms of engagement. But having said that, one of the things that I think is really good to do when you're in the early days of discussing technology, a piece of intellectual property, is to tell what it's good for, but not necessarily how it works. So it could be, it's a technology that prevents batteries from catching on fire, and it works using a ceramic matrix or electrode. You could say something like that, for example. But you don't have to tell the details of exactly what you did. So you're protecting yourself a little bit on the other side, but you're giving enough to interest them. So I think that's the balance there. But certainly, what's going to drive a corporate interest typically is the alignment and how that really hits at a need that they're very concerned about. And that's the thing that you really want to try to point to at a minimum.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing from Ria that we have quite a few questions, so maybe we can keep them all to less than a minute and try to hit, at least 15 or 20 more. All right, here's the next one. I'm an angel investor who would like to invest in more startups based on university IP. How do I get involved?
Tony, why don't you take that?
Okay, sure. So let's see, Ria, I don't know if you have, our slide that Glenn showed on the model. So angels investors and VCs are actually a very important part to this. So the funding comes, so to be an angel investor and do something, obviously it's not a licensing deal, it's more of a startup deal. So the university IP would be licensed to the startup. In some cases, the universities have already done that, and then we show those in the demo day. And then, sometimes those startups are ready for angel or VC deals, but a lot of times they need SBIR funding first. And so, that's non-dilutive, and that's really good because it moves the technology further before the angel comes in. So if you look at this graphic, you'll see that angels are there. The way we see this progressing in some cases is, as I said, SBIR funding. We are doing some university angel groups, and there should be a webinar, I think, in 2 weeks. Those are different than regular angels. So they're still angels, but there's a little bit more of philanthropic and mentoring activities in the way we're setting up the university angel groups. Because a lot of angels act like VCs, and if you're one of those, then you might have to wait till somebody de-risks it to you. And I don't know, Rhea, if you can bring up quickly that other commercialization readiness level slide.
Hey, Tony, can I just jump in for a minute?
Yeah,
I think for the angels, certainly coming to demo day is a really good way to meet the startups. If you have significant market understanding, then we can consider you as a selector. The third way would be if you're an angel network and you want to meet alongside of the conference. That's something that we've been talking to people about, with the idea that since the startups are there, you'd be able to talk to them in your network immediately.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, so another piece is there are roadshows that we will start implementing at the demo days, which is for companies that are not seed or startup, but actually have probably gone through the process in a prior cycle and are ready for a little bit more money. This is the graphic. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but for that angel in the audience, so we are doing these milestones with these companies. It's really an industrial model that the corporates have come up with. So everything's broken down into what we're calling commercialization readiness of And if you're an angel that comes in on a company with $1 million of less of sales, then we would show you companies that are CRL 6. So that's how you would kind of come in. If you do something at CRL level 5, which is like there's a product, but it's before sales, then we would show you those kind of companies in your technology area. Vicky, did you want to say anything on this, or should we go?
Well, I just say we should move on because we have a lot of questions, but obviously you can go to our website and contact us and we'll help you get more involved.
Great. So here's the next question. Is this program accessible to non-university startups? Anybody want to take that?
Well, typically, most startups often have a university connection of some kind, whether it's a faculty advisor, they've been through an I-Corps program, or they've been in a university incubator. Any kind of interaction with the university, as long as the university is amenable to that, qualifies as a university startup. We don't see a lot of conflict around that point, but we have typically had startups that had some kind of connection to a university.
Yeah, let me just say a couple more words. So in a sense, it's a yes, but really you should go to a university near you and just talk to them, because to be a university startup is actually pretty easy. You don't have to have technology from the university. They just need to know about you and help you, and they have great networks to help you. So you really, if you're not making use of universities to help your startup, you're really missing on a great resource in your area. So that's number one. And number two, you really should try to get their IP, because your company would just look so much better if you're a startup that has a couple of $1 million worth of research that the federal government has paid for, rather than you're just a startup, right? That could sometimes just be marketing, but generally that's going to be very important in substance too. They just probably have what you're looking for. If they don't, the federal labs do. If you're trying to solve some of these really hard science problems for the corporations. So I would suggest that if you're not a university startup, talk to your university and talk to your federal labs. All right. Okay, the next question. This looks like it is directed at university IP, but Tony mentioned federal lab technologies at the beginning. How do federal labs participate? Okay, yeah, that's a good question. It wasn't clear because there's always a bit of a tension. I kind of mentioned that on the last answer too. Federal labs are just great sources of technology, but it's really hard to get the technologies out of the federal labs. It just is. And Vicky and others, other corporates could give you some stories of how hard it is. People have asked us, especially people from Congress, have said, "Hey, can you help figure out this problem?" The best we've come up with is that the university creates the startup, and then once that startup is created, we'll help find complementary or supplemental IP that's in that area, right? So it becomes like a portfolio of IP that the startup could use to do whatever it's trying to do. That'll be a much stronger startup again, and that seems to be the best way to pull things out of the federal labs from our point of view. It's just the federal labs don't have the students, they don't have angels and VCs hovering around, they don't have people that are trying to create startups, they don't have alums, they just lack all the natural networks that universities have. So it's a problem for federal labs to create startups themselves. And
However,
so
let me just add that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just add that the federal labs do have great technology, and if they're willing to participate, in other words, if they're willing to submit intellectual property for consideration, that they're willing to license, I would encourage them to do so. But as Tony just pointed out, the intellectual property that comes from the federal labs has been funded by the government, and that's really what we're trying to do. As we mentioned at the very beginning, the idea here is to try to help the United States grow its infrastructure in technology by creating jobs in this area and by using technology that was funded by the government. So that's perfectly fine. The federal labs have not been the easiest, in my mind, to deal with in the past. And so corporates have trouble sometimes licensing technology, not always. But I believe that if there's a federal lab out there listening today who is interested in participating, please submit your intellectual property. It's fair game.
Great, thank you. All right, what tech areas can be submitted? Glenn, I think you have that, right? That slide, maybe?
I don't have that slide, Tony.
Do you remember that? Do you remember the categories?
Yeah, I do. I have them. So the
Okay,
technical areas of interest, and we should have put this up there, and Ria's got them up now. The pharma area, which is anything in the medical and pharma area, biological services, biotech, life sciences, etc. You can read that list. Advanced manufacturing covers a large gamut of material science things such as nanotechnology and sensors and so forth, 3D printing, all of that. In the material science space, clean tech and chemicals, energy, as we mentioned earlier, is a hot topic, and solar and energy storage. All of these things around water are very important right now. And then information technologies, the virtual reality, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, of course, very hot. But we also have folks who are interested from the government in Homeland Security, in defense, and big data. Those guys are very much into that. Again, augmented reality, mixed reality, artificial intelligence, very, very hot topics in these areas. Under consumer-facing platforms, there's a lot of different things here where we have consumer products that are sold every day in maybe big box retail stores, things like that. Cosmetics, the same thing. Food and nutrition and your health in the grocery chains and so forth. Personal care products that are sold in big box stores. But it can also cover things like mobility and transportation, an Uber type platform that might be new to the world, packaging technologies that might help a lot of different businesses have better packaged materials, and so forth. So this covers a lot of consumer-facing technology that you would see typically in a retail environment.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. If my IP gets selected, what happens next?
It will get graded. It'll go into the vetting system. As we mentioned earlier, the vetting system is a targeted sheet that helps people kind of focus in on what's important about the technology, and it gets scored. And then once we get it scored, we will get back to you to tell you what it did and how it did, and then whether or not it makes the cut to get into the book.
Right, and then if it gets in the book, which means corporates scored it and think it has a lot of value to the market, there's really two two routes it could go. One is that it could get licensed directly by a corporate. So in a sense, this is a marketing platform for IP that corporates could just kind of pick up and deal directly with the university. If and this is the more likely scenario, I think, the second one, if they say it's great technology, but they don't want to license it, they want somebody else to develop it, we'll work with the university to put it into a startup and get it developed that way. Because for most of the corporates, actually, they're interested in technology, but they're interested in the commercialization levels that I showed before, that were really closer to 6, 7, 8. Really a lot more developed, and a lot of the stuff coming out of the universities or federal labs is at 0. And so somebody needs to take it there. And usually the appetite from the corporates themselves is that they don't want to do that work. So that's where the universities come in, and that's where we could come in. Next question. I want to confirm that non-provisional applications filed but not yet granted are eligible for submission, or not eligible. Actually, they are. So it wasn't clear maybe on the presentation, but they are eligible. We will look at wait a minute, filed. I'm a little confused here. It's filed, so if it's filed, it could be a provisional application that isn't completely filed for a full patent. As long as you have some protection. The key here is actually that if somebody tells you it's good technology, that it goes forward. Nobody wants to waste their time reviewing things that then don't move forward. So we've had discussions with some universities, and they said, if they put it into a provisional application, they would appreciate if we looked at it, because if we select it, they will definitely go forward with it. And they've said, to give us some comfort, they usually do so anyway. So it's a formality to kind of go through the provisional. That's fine. The only caveat, if we have a lot of people that are just submitting things, and then if they're chosen, they don't move forward, then we'll revisit that. But right now, as long as you have something on file, it's good to go.
It helps if it's on file, it's been submitted, because that is a record that starts the clock for that technology. And I know there was a concern earlier from someone about confidentiality, and everyone's always concerned that somebody might take their technology, and because you have it filed, it starts the clock. And when it starts the clock, that means that there's a record that this has been submitted. So I think that's an important thing, to have it filed.
Right, and it also goes to the question earlier about protection of the IP.
Right.
Okay, next, I think we're running out of time. So Ria, how many more can we do?
I think we can do two more, like this and
Okay.
one more. Yeah.
Okay, so let's try to do them quickly so Ria can do the wrap up. We are a high-tech startup, green tech. We are not a spinoff from a university. Can we take part? Yeah, I think we mentioned this before. So if you're not a university startup, you can participate. University, as I mentioned before, just can help you a lot, and especially in an area like green tech. I'm sure you could find some technology that's on point at some university and some federal lab. It doesn't have to. I mean, you could search around. You can license a technology from anywhere across the country. So, and I'm sure somebody has something that you're working on and can actually accelerate it.
And I think it's important. You need to decide: are you submitting to the startup program, or are you submitting to the IP2Startup program? And if you're looking at licensing your intellectual property, that's different from being part of the startup demo day. So there's two different things you can do here. If you're wanting to license your technology or want to talk to corporates, you would need intellectual property that was already granted. If you're just a startup with clean tech, you can submit as a startup for the demo day.
Okay, Glenn, did you want to add anything?
Let's go on, next one.
Okay, so this is the last question then.
Mm-hmm.
What's your success rate? Any good recent and specific success story examples? Glenn, that's a good one for you, I think.
So so this is the first time that we're doing the IP2Startup program. We are using the model from the demo day, which was a new model that we have run twice now and has been extremely successful. We're getting very strong feedback that it's very efficient for people to find startups. In other words, it's very efficient connecting corporates and startups up. We really want to seed the system early on by creating more startups that are aligned with what the corporates really want. Are also, offering the potential for the corporates to find those core technologies that are really sustaining and important to them. So we don't have a success rate right now in the sense of the actual IP program, but we have seen this model working very, very well and gaining momentum on the demo day side. So I say, just say by analogy with what's going on in demo day, I think this is going to be very successful.
Yeah, and I would just say that even in the demo days, it was only our first real stand-up time in April, and I was impressed, and as were the attendees, with what happened in demo day and how the startups were able to connect with the big corporates, and some of them were actually surprised at how successful they were at having good meetings with their corporate potential partners. And as we do on every meeting, we follow up and talk to folks and find out exactly what happened and where things are going for them. And we're getting great feedback that as long as you're willing to stay there and meet with the corporates and hang in there for the whole meeting and not run off or anything, but stay there and really network the room, you're going to have success. There's just no way you can't have success, because there's too many names there and too many good corporate contacts, and these are the people you need to know in order to get your company off the ground or your IP license. So there's really good reasons to attend and really good reasons to stay and network.
Yeah, let me just say a couple words then. So this is a very unique program because it was developed by corporates for to solve their own needs, which if you're trying to get to a corporate in an exit or some kind of strategic alliance, these are the people that are telling you how they want to do it and what they're looking for. So there's no other program like that. This has been industry created, so it's really unique. And I think, Glenn, I think you did a calculation. At our last demo day, I think it was like $500 or $600 billion worth of sales were represented by the corporates there. So I mean, it's sorry, go ahead.
950 billion.
950 billion. So it was higher than I thought. Okay, great. So it's just a really good opportunity for you to talk to the corporates, get to know them. I'm going to end with this because we're running out of time. This is a long game, right? And part of it is that you just have to get the relationships and then, pivot, as people talk about these days, right? You have to align with the market. You just have to figure out what you're doing that somebody cares about and go for it. And, finding out what people will pay for is actually, the main job here. And so there's no sense of building something that you think is great, but nobody will buy. So this is how you find out what, people are willing to sign a check for. All right, so I'm going to end it here. Thank you, Vicki and Glenn, and everybody. Ria, back to you.
All right, thank you, Tony, Vicki, and Glenn, for the wonderful presentation. And we tried to get to as many questions as we can, but we ran out of time. So just a reminder, if you have a question that needed to be answered, like a really important question, just email us at usdemoday@ncet2.org, or you can set up a live chat with us at ncet2.org with one of our support staff. Again, a reminder for those listening today that the deadline to submit either an IP or a company for the US Demo Day or the IP2Startup program is on July 14th. We do have 2 deadlines, but again, as I mentioned a couple of times today, we do encourage everyone to apply early. We are only accepting a maximum of 200 applications in total for this round. So again, try to bring in your companies and your IP as early as possible. So, we have time to take a look at your application or send back corrections if ever we do find something wrong with it. So this is the link. You'll be able to find this on our website under events. But again, if you have questions, just feel free to email us at usdemoday@ncet2.org or live chat us at ncet2.org. Again, thank you everyone for joining us and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.